Kilroy goes off the shelf because I'm bored. So bored I have Monopoly on my table. Why? Monopoly's a board game. It's got a board. It's a board game. Clue. It's a board game. See the board? So we have war games that are board games. If I recall correctly, I think Tactics 2 was a mounted board game. Here's an old Chancellorsville from Avalon Hill. It's a board game. So we have these board games. Why do we have paper maps in our war games? In fact, we probably have more paper maps in our war games than we have mounted maps. That wasn't always the way. I mean, Avalon Hill had Chancellorsville. There's a board game. My first board game I bought, or first war game I bought, Panzer Leader, has a mounted map. Squad Leader, mounted board. War and Peace, mounted board. Kingmaker, well, it's not mounted, but it is a thicker board. It's kind of a board game. It's this one-piece fold-out that Avalon Hill got into, where you could fold it all together and it could fit into one of their classic bookcase games. But it's not paper. It's a little bit thicker, but it's a one-piece. Here's a mounted map board. That's an entire map, and that is Hitler's War. Here we go. It's mounted board. Then you got Air Force here, another one of my games. Now this had the Kingmaker type cardboard, a little thicker, but not necessarily mounted, but thicker than paper. Unfortunately, this is the only piece that still remained attached. The rest of my boards, notice I called them boards, all came unattached. So, we used to have a lot of mounted boards back in the day, at least Avalon Hill did. Now, not all their games were mounted boards. Our mounted maps. Here is Stonewall in the Valley, part of the great campaigns of American Civil War. And it's a paper map, as you can see here. And, the other big producer in the 70s, SPI, well, they did paper maps. I don't know if they had any mounted maps. I'm sure you guys will tell me that. But my experience with SPI was mostly, if not exclusively, paper. And they did paper maps. Now, why the difference? Well, there's a lot of reasons why you might have a difference. I mean, paper maps don't necessarily cost as much as a mounted map board, especially probably in the manufacturer, but also, once you put it together for shipping purposes. I mean, that's a consideration nowadays. Paper maps were also a little bit more flexible in, you could put them under plexiglass. Here's some plexiglass here and hold them down. Whereas some of these mounted maps, as you saw for the Air Force, it kind of breaks up, doesn't lay flat, warps. Whereas paper maps, you can, there's folds in it, but if you put it under plexiglass, they lay pretty flat. You can write on the plexiglass. You can put your combat odds or draw arrows of where your attacks are. So there's a little bit more flexibility there. Plus, if you do one of the monster games like GDW did one of the first monster games, there's a lot of maps, and having a ton of mounted maps or trying to put those together could be a mess. And you especially can't put plexiglass over those, or you could, but that could be a mess as well. So, or very cumbersome. So, the multi-map type situations become a problem if you're doing mounted maps. And so you had Avalon Hill doing mounted maps, and you had, mostly mounted maps, I guess, at one point, then shifting over. And then you had SPI doing mostly paper maps, if not exclusively paper maps. So, the battle began back at that time. Nowadays, well, we still have a lot of paper maps nowadays. Here is a Clash of Arms game, beautiful map, Rick Barber map. There's something to be said about a really nice paper map. I mean, it looks kind of like what a map you would expect a general to lay out and figure out their battle plans on. But here is a beautiful map under plexiglass, and as I said, you can mark on the plexiglass or keep the map flat in that regards. Games that have that have multiple maps, like the Great Battles of History or Men of Iron, or games that have multiple maps that are, a 2 or 3 or 4 map, or your monster games. Well, you know, they probably need to use paper. I mean, that's probably the best way to do that, to keep it economical. You know, the Great Battles of History. Here's GMT, Great Battles of History, Samurai. Here's a map that you can, you know, do two-sided. So, you know, if you have 4 battles in a game, you only need 2 maps. If you have 5 battles, you know, or 6 battles, you only need 3 maps. You know, you guys can do the math, right? Because you can do these two-sided, and you can do it on paper, and you can put it, you know, under plexiglass if you want, and handle it that way. Sometimes you can put more than one map on one side and divide it up that way. GMT does some mounted maps. I mean, one of my first experiences with GMT on what their so-called mounted maps was dealing with, you know, For the People. This was the map that comes along with the game, and For the People, it's a little bit thicker paper than usual. And then they came out with kind of a mounted map. It's really not mounted, it's just thicker, you know, cardboard, but it's a little bit better map than what you get in the game. And they kind of started doing that. And they actually do, you know, actually full-blown mounted maps now. You have, like, here's Pax Romana, and this is one of those fold-out, one-piece fold-outs, but it's a fully, as you can see there, mounted map. Other manufacturers, you know, Worthington Games, most of their games, if I believe correctly or understand correctly, I think are mounted maps. I don't have all their games, but I have several of their games, but they do quite a few mounted maps in their games. Here's 1944 Battle of the Bulge. Compass Games does a fair amount of mounted maps. Here's a Pragmatic War. That is a mounted map here, as you can see. But Compass Games is kind of a mixed bag. I mean, they do a lot of multi-map games, so those are going to be paper and probably done in the United States. I think their mounted maps tend to be like one maps or a little bit smaller that they can fit in a box, and I think those are done in China. Multi-Man Publishing, you know, which does the SCS series and has a lot of the gamer games and has OCS. Well, those tend to be bigger maps, and I don't think they do any mounted, not that I know of. Again, you guys can let me know in the comments. But here's Iron Curtain, part of the SCS series. I mean, this is a paper map, and that's what you're going to get from them. Lock and Load, I mean, they do the tactical, Lock and Load Tactical and World at War. Here's a World at War 85 map. You know, it's not paper, but it's also not, you know, mounted. It's just a little bit thicker. It's not as thick as that For the People map that we looked at earlier. So there's Lock and Load. So, I mean, you get a variety. I would say the vast majority of maps are probably going to be, or vast majority of war games are going to be paper maps. You know, DVG does mounted maps, but, you know, their games are a lot of times are mainly card-based. And so the map is not as much of as more of a marker or chart for the game, as opposed to being a full-blown kind of battle map or a hex map in most cases. You know, Decision Games, you know, which is kind of the successor to a lot of SPI games. Well, you know, they're going to use paper. I mean, especially in their magazine games. Here's a magazine game, World at War, but they also have Strategy and Tactics. And Modern War, well, they're going to use paper, of course, because they're throwing it in a magazine, and they're not going to ship a magazine with a mounted map. Also, they're like their folio games. You know, they're going to put, you know, a paper map in their folio games. So, you know, there's pros and cons to mounted maps or mounted board games versus paper maps. What do you guys like? Which side are you on? Do you like the mounted maps and the board games because it is a board game and you want that quality, you want that feel, you want that to be a game that you pull out of a box and have all the tactile feel of a mounted map and the quality that goes along with that? Or do you prefer, you know, paper maps and, you know, putting plexiglass on it? You know, any, you know, self-respecting wargamer is going to have plenty of plexiglass and some tweezers and a clipper in the background. You know, that's what you need, and so you need to have paper maps. Which side do you guys land on? Are you board or are you paper? Here's a DVD bonus feature. This is what it looks like after one of my filmings. I tell you what, I'm not going to be bored cleaning that mess up.